I'm the hugest fan of saffron. Why? Saffron has 28 randomized controlled trials showing it's equally effective to antidepressants. And there's a brand new huge reviews paper on 192 studies on 17,000 patients looking at what supplements actually have efficacy for depression. Number one was saffron.
So, at the highest level, what do we know today about the relationship between chronic pain and our brain compared to, say, a decade or so ago?
Well, it's really clear now that pain is felt and comes to live in your brain. And if your brain is not healthy, you are much more likely to experience pain and to have trouble healing from chronic pain. If you don't heal the circuits in your brain that feel it, you will not get well. And uh, based on my own journey with pain and our imaging work, it just became crystal clear to me your body wants to heal, but if you don't put it in a healing environment, you're going to suffer.
And so you said not a healthy brain. What constitutes a brain in your view that is not healthy?
So either one that works too hard or not hard enough. So at our clinic, I have 11 clinics around the country. We do a brain imaging study called SPECT, and SPECT looks at blood flow and activity. It looks at how the brain works. And if it works too hard, especially in two areas, in fact, it'd be good to just talk about the three main pain pathways in the brain. The first one is called the lateral pain feeling pathway. It goes through your thalamus. That's a big structure deep in the brain, sort of looks like an egg. And that's the sensory gateway in the brain. And when pain comes, if that's too busy, if that's inflamed, it hits you much harder. And then it goes to the top back part of your brain, area called the parietal lobe, which is your sensory brain. And that tells you where it's at. Is it your back? Is it your knee? Is it your neck? Is it your shoulder? So that's the first one, the feeling pathway. And then the second one is called the medial, because it's toward the middle, pain suffering pathway. That's where pain gets colored with darkness, with fear, with dread. And that is often overactive in people who have past emotional trauma. In fact, when I first got interested in pain, shortly after I started doing imaging, I had Sam, who was a police officer who had been involved. Uh, he had 6 back surgeries, and he had 2 high-speed police chase accidents as a police officer, and now he's on opiates, he's drinking, he becomes a shell of himself, he tries to kill himself. And that's how he and I met. And it was right after I started my imaging work, and a part of his brain, this suffering pathway, was just on fire. And I'm like, oh, I have to calm that down. And once I did, he said, I still hurt, but I don't think about it all the time. And he ended up getting retrained, and now he's an attorney. So lateral pain feeling pathway, where you feel it, the suffering pathway that colors it, and the inhibitory pathway that calms it down. And that's mostly an area in your prefrontal cortex, largest in humans and any other animal by far. It has mostly inhibitory fibers. It stops you from saying things you shouldn't say, from doing things you shouldn't do, and it turns down the noise of pain. And so it's why you should never let your girls hit soccer balls with their head, because when you do that, you're actually damaging this inhibitory or calming pathway in the brain. And, I got interested mostly, my own pain journey, which we can talk about, but it's like, why is Cymbalta? It's a good antidepressant. Why is it FDA approved for chronic pain? Because they work on the same circuitry in the brain. Why does SAMe, which is a supplement, S-adenosylmethionine, why does it have efficacy for depression and for arthritis? Because it works on the same pathway. And I thought that was such an interesting idea that I wanted to share it with the people who read my work. And I'm very excited about this new book.
The book's amazing. Change Your Brain, Change Your Pain. Great title as always. I'll hold it up for those watching on YouTube. So a couple things to unpack there. And before we touch on your journey, you talked about this case where there was trauma. And if I'm listening and I'm not currently experiencing any pain, but we've got an audience of people who are health forward and proactive with regards to their health. What are some signs that I might want to look for before I get to a place where maybe I'm experiencing pain and I gotta have to do a lot more work to try to feel better? What are some of those emotional signs that we should be on the watch for?
Let me answer that in the context of the doom loop. So I think of the star of this new book is a concept I created that I saw not only in myself, but also in my patients. And it's called the doom loop. And this book is not just about physical pain. It's also about emotional pain. And it's how they dance together. And so the doom loop has this acronym I like called PAIN HQ, and the P is pain for any reason. And it can be a biological reason. You broke your ankle. And I tell the story of a girl who has CRPS, chronic regional pain syndrome, which is just a disaster. But it started when she broke her ankle. It can be psychological. You get fired, or you have some sort of loss in your life. It can be social. You have a breakup, which is one of the worst things as a psychiatrist I've seen that puts people at risk for things like depression and suicide. Or it can be spiritual in that you have a moral injury. And so I grew up Roman Catholic, and the pedophile scandal, it was clearly painful for so many Catholics and people who grew up Catholic. And so I think understanding pain from a biopsychosocial, spiritual perspective is really important. So the P is pain for any reason. It then activates the suffering pathway, which is more active in people who are depressed, in people who are anxious, and people who have high ACE scores. ACE stands for adverse childhood experiences. So it's on a scale of 0 to 10, how many bad things happened to you? And in the book, I actually talk about a study I did with 7,500 patients who had ACE scores and how early childhood trauma primes the brain for pain. And then I is increasing negative thoughts, increasing ANTs, automatic negative thoughts. So you have pain for any reason. It activates the suffering pathway. Your brain then starts talking to you in a negative way. And one of the fun strategies in the book is give your mind a name so you don't end up believing every stupid thing you think, which then goes to N, which is nervous tension. And that's such an interesting part of the book. And not only is it muscle tension that makes everything worse. And did you know that 80% of people my age, so I'm 71, 80% of people my age who have no pain have abnormal back MRIs. And so often you get pain in your neck or pain in your back or pain in your shoulder, you go get an MRI, it's abnormal, and you go, "Oh, well, I have to have surgery." And they did a huge study on back surgery, and people who had back surgery compared to conservative care, things like physical therapy, the outcomes were no better than with conservative care, but the side effects were 21 times greater with the surgery. Sort of makes sense. And so if that's true, 80% of people my age who have no pain have abnormal backs. Before I jump to surgery, I might wanna do the things I recommend in the book. The other interesting part about this nervous tension, and borrowed this from John Sarno's work on chronic pain. He said chronic pain is often repressed rage. And I thought, now that is something interesting. And I actually spent a lot of time in the book and in my own clinical practice. Well, how do I help the good people? Sarno calls them the goodists. You're much more likely to have chronic pain if you're a goodist. You know, you're kind, you never want to hurt anybody's feelings, you people please. How can I help these people? And I'm one of them, get the rage out. And so I learned a therapy that I talk about in the book called ISTDP, intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy. It's a rage therapy. And it's so interesting. And my wife calls me Pollyanna because I'm always looking for, well, what's good about this situation we're in? And I realized for myself that Pollyanna had to make friends with Hannibal Lecter, that we had to get in touch with the rage and write about it and think about it and not just block it. H in Pain HQ, H goes to, well, all of these things, negativity, tension lead to harmful habits, whether it's opiates. And people don't understand when they're using opiates for chronic pain, what they're doing is they're shutting off their own internal opiate production. They're decreasing their calming pathway and they're actually increasing their pain. And I know I'm gonna get a lot of grief for that, but I actually referenced a study that showed that after 2 weeks of opiate use, it actually pisses off your white blood cells. They become angry, and they then increase inflammation, which then accelerates the pain. So you end up chasing something that is clearly bad for you. And so, I'm not a fan of opiates. And then that leads to Q, which is the quagmire, the quicksand, the doom loop. And so there's a relief loop on how you get out of it, which we can talk about. But I love this concept so much because whenever I present it to my patients, they're like, that's me. You know, I hurt and then I smear it with trouble. And then I go negative, and then I'm tense, and I'm blocking my feelings, and then I reach for things that I know aren't good for me.
100%. And just personally, I'll briefly share. I had a big part of the mindbodygreen founding story was I almost had back surgery 16 years ago. I had two extruded discs in my lower back pressing on my sciatic nerve. It was structural, was real. It was an old basketball injury from college. I had excruciating sciatica. I could not walk. It was brutal. Coincidentally, it was at a time I was part of another company and it was failing and financially it was in ruin and I was broke and it was painful and it was a really tough time for me. And the moment and I was going to get surgery. I wasn't opposed to it. And it was a last doctor who said to me, I sought a second opinion because back surgery success rates are not good. I know you're a basketball fan. If you ask Steve Kerr, what's the one regret you have? Will not be basketball related. It will be that he got back surgery. And he will talk about that today and all the damage and pain and suffering. And so I had one doctor who said, "Yeah, I think you need surgery, but you know what? Maybe try some yoga or therapy." And so that's what I did. And so yoga helped, but it also psychologically, I went through a process where I let go of the attachment to the outcome and started to let go of the energy and financial piece of this in a way that allowed me to function in a more productive way. And over the course of 6 months, the back pain just completely went away. And it was actually part of the founding story of mindbodygreen: mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, environment, all connected. So I hear you on the backstory piece. And the doom loop, I think everyone can relate to. Whether it's monkey mind, that chatter, we all, no matter how mentally strong we are, at some point or another get to a place where there's this narrative, there's this thing, and we can't let it go. For others, maybe it's with us for a half hour, an hour, but for many people, they just it's paralyzing, and that's real.
Well, and there's nowhere in school where they teach us to manage our minds. Think about how insane that is. I was 28 in my psychiatric residency at Walter Reed in Washington, D.C., and one of our professors said, "You have to teach your patients not to believe every stupid thing they think." And I remember sitting in the lecture hall going, "Well, I believe every stupid thing I think." That no one had ever taught me to just question the noise and the nonsense. And it's a huge part of being a happy person is managing your mind. And if whenever you go negative, your frontal lobes drop in activity. I have published this brand new study on negativity, and it was on 2,000 people. The more negative you are, the less frontal lobe function you have. Isn't I think that's so interesting. The less hope, we're working on another study now on hope. The less hope you have, the less frontal lobe function you have. The less happy you are, the less frontal lobe function you are. So you see negativity, low hope, low happiness, more pain, because your brain can't naturally calm down your thalamus, that feeling pathway. And nobody thinks about that when they're managing chronic pain. It's red light therapy, I'm sort of a fan of, or ibuprofen, which will ruin your gut, or Tylenol, which now has its own famed controversy. And it's like, let's manage our mind and get our brain and body healthy.
So how do you work on that frontal lobe? If I'm proactive, if I'm not feeling pain at the moment, the same way I want to work on my biceps, I'm going to go to the gym and do curls. What's your prescription for someone? Okay, like I'm good, but I want to work on my frontal lobe. What should I be doing?
So, new learning is so helpful. It's like, oh, well, I want to work it out. And so, I have this term called brain envy. You have to love your brain and you want to have a bigger brain, right? It's the only organ where size actually matters. And you, for certain, want to have frontal lobe envy. And in order to strengthen it, it's really three things: love it, care about it, avoid things that hurt it, and do things that help it. And so it's like, well, what hurts your frontal lobes? We talked about hitting soccer balls with your head. Or I just dropped a podcast, was great, with Tim Tebow, the, you know, first round draft pick, college Hall of Fame quarterback, who's just doing amazing work.
Incredible human being, the what he's doing with children, and unbelievable.
It's awesome. And you can see football hurts your frontal lobe. His frontal lobe on the left side is hurt. And so hyperbaric oxygen will help strengthen it. One of my favorite treatments to help repair frontal lobe damage. Alcohol decreases activity in the frontal lobes. I did this. project with the Stanford professor, and then I met him a couple of years later, and he said, "I just have to thank you." I said, "It's awesome. Why?" He said, "I wake up 100% every day because of you." I said, "Why?" He said, "I stopped drinking." And I'm like, "Congratulations." So, what suppresses frontal lobe function? Alcohol, marijuana, nicotine, too much caffeine. A little bit's probably not a problem, but more than a little bit decreases blood flow. Being overweight. It's like, being overweight, how does that affect frontal lobe function? I have an acronym, I think you and I have talked about it before, called BRIGHT Mind. To keep your brain healthy or rescue it, you have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors. If you're overweight, you have all 11. If you're not sleeping, you have all 11, which is crazy. And then to strengthen it, it's table tennis. Not kidding when I say it. It is the best brain game. I love basketball too. Actually, outside my house, I have a basketball court. But table tennis, why? You gotta get your eyes, hands, and feet all working together while you think about this spin on the ball. And now it's not beer pong for sure, but I love racket sports, and people who play racket sports live the longest. And there's this very interesting term. It's called crossed cerebellar diasthesis. What does that mean? It means if you hurt your frontal lobe, your left frontal lobe, it actually turns off the right side of your cerebellum. And your cerebellum is so critical to coordination, but also thought coordination and pain. And so coordination exercises, table tennis, tennis, racquetball, are really great to activate frontal lobe function.
Is there anything specific you'd recommend for kids?
Well, I'd get kids playing ping pong early, and I would get them a teacher, and I would help them be good because it's just a game they can play their whole
Could basketball check that box? Or no, not frontal lobe. I'm just curious. I'm not gonna go buy a ping pong table.
life. I think basketball can be really helpful because obviously you gotta get your eyes, hands, and feet all working together, but it's not as quick, short movements, but I'm a huge fan of basketball. But I really am serious when I say you should not let children play contact sports, especially if they have the apolipoprotein E4 gene. If you have that gene, it's a gene that increases your risk of Alzheimer's disease. If you then get a concussion with that gene, it accelerates that risk fairly dramatically. And so if you go, "No, I'm gonna let my kids play," at least test them for the gene. And if they have that gene, I would argue not a good idea. And soccer is a contact sport, lots, and it's worse in girls, which is interesting because girls, 90% of female IQ in one study, they found it was in their frontal. For males, it's more widely distributed. So a female who has a frontal lobe injury is more likely to be hurt by it. Their life is more likely to be hurt by it.
Jason Walkup here, founder and co-CEO of mindbodygreen and the host of the mindbodygreen podcast. Please subscribe. You'll never miss a show and you won't regret it. And so what do you do? Back to the doom loop. What do you do personally when you find, uh-oh, this is happening? Let's stop it.
Well, so a little bit about my story. When I was 35, I had chronic pain. My hands, my knees, and I couldn't like get off the couch or off the floor to play with my children. And then uh, I think I became a really good psychiatrist because I'm good at listening to my patients. One of my patients told me I stopped aspartame, the sweetener in diet soda, and my arthritis went away. And I, at the time, was drinking diet soda like she was my best friend. And, like, there was Jack in the Box across the street from my office, so I really didn't know much, even though I was a doctor. And I'd get 32-ounce Diet Coke every day, and I'm like, "Oh, I'll stop it." And no lie, my pain went away. And I'm not that smart, so I had to test it, and the pain immediately came back. So I have a body that hurts with aspartame, and it's been reported in the literature. And so for a long time, my pain went away. And then I'm like 50, it's my knees, and then it's my back, and then it's my hip, and then it's my shoulder, and then it's my neck. And I'm like, and always the MRIs are abnormal. But I know what general anesthesia does to your brain, and it's not good. Children who get general anesthesia have a higher incidence of learning disabilities, and adults who get general anesthesia have a higher incidence of dementia. And so, not wanting surgery, even though it's often recommended. And so, I monitor the doom loop. And now, for the last 2 years, I have no pain at all. And I love that. And when if pain comes, like, "Oh, it's like my knee hurts," I'm like, "What did I have for dinner last night? What stress am I under? What is triggering it?" And this is very important. All of my patients every day win or learn. So there's no pain, or we're hunting down which the biological, psychological, social, spiritual source of my pain. And then I always am working to calm my suffering pathway. And you can do it with supplements. Like, I'm the hugest fan of saffron and zinc and curcumins. Our best-selling product is called Happy Saffron, and partly because Khloe Kardashian held it up on her podcast I was on and said, "Oh, I've taken this for 3 years." Why? Saffron has 28 randomized controlled trials showing it's equally effective to antidepressants. And there's a brand new, huge review study paper on 192 studies on 17,000 patients looking at what supplements actually have efficacy for depression. Number one was saffron. And if you added zinc and curcumins to antidepressants, they were much more effective. And there are a number of studies on saffron for fibromyalgia, saffron for arthritis, saffron for PMS. And I just like, what can I do to calm this pathway? Omega-3 fatty acids would be another, or SAMe with betaine. They tend to work better together. And of course, do you know about havening?
No.
Oh, it's a wonderful, we could do like a whole thing on havening, but it's how you calm emotional triggers. And it's very simple. It's either It's basically based on this idea, if you stimulate both hemispheres at once, a little bit like EMDR, if you stimulate both hemispheres at once, it tends to send quieting signals to your amygdala. And so my favorite havening story is my dad died 5 years ago, and it was awful. And a couple of days later, I'm at his house and I'm feeling really sad. And I'm going through a stack of papers, and all of a sudden, there's a picture of my dead dad in the mortuary in this random stack of papers. And I was so angry about that. Like, what idiot would do that? And I was just starting to spin on the picture. And later that day, I'm still spinning on it. And I'm like, oh, you treat people who have this problem. What would you tell them to do? Haven it. And so, so you either rub your hands together or you grab both of your shoulders and you just stroke down. And for the first 30 seconds, you go into the feeling. So many people who have chronic pain block their feelings. And, it's like, "Oh, I'm gonna have a quart of ice cream, or I'm gonna smoke some pot, or I'm gonna have a drink." And I'm like, "No, I never want you to do that. I want you to go into the feeling so that you realize it's not as scary as you think it is." Anyways, so 30 seconds into the feeling, thinking about how pissed off I am.
Yeah, so you're rubbing your shoulders. For those listening, you're just rubbing your shoulders, both hands stroking your shoulders.
Yeah, it takes like a second each, 30 seconds. And then you keep doing it for another 90 seconds, but distract yourself and go somewhere you like. Go to the beach, go to the mountains, go to the lake, go to a play, just in your mind. And then you rate it at the beginning, 0 to 10, how upsetting it is. It was a 10 for me. And after the first havening, so after 2 minutes, well, now it's a 3. I'm like, okay. And then I did it again. I ended up doing it 4 times, so under 10 minutes, and it's a 0. And I love the picture because it's the last picture of my dad on Earth. And the research shows it calms down this pathway. And then, so relief, recognize the pain triggers, ease the suffering pathway. L is let go of the negativity. And this is a practice that I believe everybody should do. Whenever you feel pain or sad or mad or nervous or out of control, write down what you're thinking. And then just ask yourself whether or not it's true. If you know that it's true, and does that thought serve you or does it steal from you? And it's really training your mind. And then there's a whole section in the book on positivity bias training, training your mind to look for what's right rather than what's wrong. So Pollyanna lives in the third step. Well, she meets Hannibal Lecter in the fourth step because it's very important to let go of the tension and also the repressed emotions. So in there, I don't know that we've ever talked about it, but early in my career, I hypnotized every patient I saw. I love hypnosis and found it to be incredibly effective to decrease the tension in your body. Plus, it opens your mind for healthier exploration. And one of the exercises I do for rage is put people in a trance and then have them go to a clearing where they see a stump, and there are on that stump all the pictures of the things that have hurt them, the things that have made them angry. And there's a hypnosis exercise I do where we chop all those pictures up, where we get to the rage and then get it out. So I always want people to express it appropriately. But if you bottle it, it's going to come out in your back, your shoulder, your neck, wherever. And then we have them get into good habits. And as I turned 71, I'm like, and my patients love this who are older because I'm like, I'm not even in the fourth quarter, right? I completely plan to live to 100. So I'm sort of at the latter part of the third quarter. And that's when games actually get interesting, right? If you're a basketball fan, if they're within 20 points at the end of the third quarter, they can still win. So I just always see whatever age I'm at is the most exciting age I've ever been.
Or if you're the Indiana Pacers with, Tyrese, if you're in 15 points in 2 minutes, you're still in the game. Uh, so a couple of things to unpack. And, you mentioned marijuana, and I know you and I share similar views here. And I've said this before on the show, but I just think it's so important. And I think it's getting up too much of a pass. Can you speak a moment about why marijuana is so detrimental to mental health, specifically for the young developing brain for those under the age of 25?
So if you use as a teenager in your 20s, it increases your risk for anxiety, depression, suicide, and psychosis. This is not an innocuous drug as we have been sold. And I published a study on 1,000 marijuana users. Every area of their brain is lower in blood flow and activity. And people say I'm biased, and I have no idea why I'm biased, right? I have no dog in the fight. If you smoke, you're much more likely to see me than if you don't. And it's what I see on imaging. Well, a brand new study out of a lab completely unrelated to mine on 1,000 marijuana users, the areas involved in learning and memory were significantly less active. And so it can help pain in the short run, but it's not going to help it in the long run. Plus, anything that increases your risk of psychosis, like, no. And it seems to be tied to a specific gene. If you have this specific gene, you have a sevenfold increased risk of psychosis. But the reason people use is they don't know how to manage their mind. And they're using this to manage their mind when it's an artificial substance and gives you no skill. And I propose, I'm actually working on this national brain health revolution that I'm very excited about, that we need national education programs teaching kids to manage their mind and get their brains healthy.
I couldn't agree more at a personal level. Anecdotally, I've seen how it can ruin lives. I am curious if you know offhand what that gene is that people should be on the look for.
I have to send it to you.
Okay, send it to me. We'll put it in the show notes. I think it's worth noting in an age where we're all doing genetic testing and blood testing, and I think that's incredibly powerful. But I couldn't agree more. You mentioned your trigger of aspartame. That's fascinating. How can one listening go about, besides, I encourage everyone to buy the books and they've got amazing tools in here, but how does one go about that process of saying, all right, what are the triggers in my life? Because we all have them.
Yeah, and so I'd be curious. So that's the first thing. I teach all my patients curious, not furious. But my first visit, I show them this graph of, when people come to see me, they have good days and bad days, but they're generally not doing that well. And then we intervene and they get better. But nobody just gets better. They're better and then they're not better. They're better and then they're not better. They're better and then they're not better. And then, 4, 5, 6 months from now, they have good days and bad days, but they're nothing like when we started. And the trick is when you fall back, don't go, this damn stuff doesn't work. Get curious about what was different about that day. What did you eat? Who did you interact with? How did you sleep? So every day we win or learn, and we're curious and we're not curious. So having that learning mindset, and anyone in chronic pain should go on an elimination diet for a month. I talk about that in the book. So eliminate gluten, dairy, corn, soy, artificial dyes and sweeteners like aspartame, and I get more testimonials from our nutritionists than anybody else in the company. Because when people eat right, this, they think right, they feel right. And brand new study on aspartame that just blew my mind. Could this epidemic of childhood, teenage, young adult mental health be related to this study? So these scientists took mice and gave them aspartame, and it made them very anxious. And then they gave them Valium, and they found that Valium really calmed them down. Bad long-term solution. But what they found, what really blew my mind, their babies who had never been exposed to aspartame were anxious. Their grandbabies were anxious, that aspartame was causing epigenetic changes that lasted for generations. And when did aspartame get unleashed in the American food supply? It's in over 5,000 products around 1980.
Wow.
Oh, so I just want people to like be curious about it.
Curious, not furious. I think that's a good motto to live by. Uh, you've worked with so many patients of all, pro athletes, celebrities, normal folks, you know, police officers. Of all the stories, who really stands out for you in terms of the context of coming to you where there's some pain, they work with you, and they're really able to identify what's really at the core here and heal themselves?
Well, I just released a podcast with Julius Randle, and it just highlights all of my work that, he was depressed, he was about to get divorced, he was smoking a lot of marijuana, and he was just a mess. But so gifted and competent. And he saw his scan. It was not healthy. I made him a poster. Here's a healthy brain. Here's yours. Here's yours if you do what I say, and here's yours if you don't. And I told him, I said, I am going to be your best investment. Right? I mean, just if I help him not get divorced, that saves him $100 million. And he just, he was like all in. And I saw him when he got traded from the Knicks to the Timberwolves, which was, like completely unexpected for everybody right before the season, trying to fit in to, a completely different system, lots of negative thinking, early childhood trauma. His parents were divorced. He had an ACE score, I think, of 5, which there was a lot of trauma growing up, a lot of negative self-talk. He was known for not doing well in the playoffs, even though that wasn't fair because he'd only been in the playoffs 3 of his 11 years and he was hurt for one of them. But, when you get a tag from Stephen A. Smith or Kendrick Perkins or whoever, and that would really grate on him. We gave his mind a name. It was after his dog that just barked at stupid stuff because that was his mind. Stopped believing everything he thought, got very clear on his goals. And the second half of the season, he was just a superstar and he had his best playoff ever. When we did the podcast, I mean, I'm just so grateful. Another fun thing we did is we created an alter ego for him. Is he was mentored under Kobe Bryant. And so we would often talk, well, how would Kobe deal with this situation? Although Julius is a much better passer than Kobe. Kobe was always shoot first, even if you're not open. Uh, and um, the Mamba disciple was his alter ego, but he only put it on for games, and he became a better dad. And yeah, I love working with him because, many of the athletes I work with, they do what you say, right? It's like, coach me. The ones that are not coachable, they don't get to a really high level of performance. And he was so coachable. And he's like, Doc, we have to invest in brain health.
I love it. Incredible story. I'm a huge fan of Julius Randle, and as our listeners know, a huge fan of basketball. On that note, who do you like to win it this year?
Wow, since I've been working with Julius, I've become a fan. I've never watched like all 82 games, and I watched all 82 Timberwolves games. And since I was a little boy, I was a huge Laker fan. I'm not sure anybody can beat the Oklahoma. They are so good, and yeah, but we'll see, right? You never know.
It's a long season. They have to stay healthy. Um, we covered a lot. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you'd like to cover or leave with any words of wisdoms or more about the book or anything you'd like to share?
If they pre-order the book, if they go to changeyourbrain.com, I actually have 12 hypnosis audios for them Curcumin's one of our supplements from Brain MD that helps with pain. The Emotional Freedom Journal, how to get the rage out, and it's out December 2nd.
Awesome. And just in the background, I want to reference, you have 2 incredibly beautiful German Shepherds.
And they're barking in the background.
Well, and I'm gonna wanna offline to find out where you got those German Shepherds, because I am also a huge German Shepherd fan, and our daughters have been asking for one. So I'm gonna we won't leave our audience with that, but I'll talk to you offline. Doc, always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.